There are questions that don't come from theory. They come from lived experience. From years of pushing through pain, ignoring warning signs, and doing what you were told a strong person is supposed to do. Keep going no matter what. And then one day the body stops negotiating. Not suddenly, not cleanly, slowly, until the life you used to live starts getting replaced by appointments, scans, referrals, waiting rooms, prescriptions, and explanations that never quite feel like answers. And somewhere in that process, a person starts asking a question that isn't really just about healthcare at all. It becomes something deeper. Is this what healing is supposed to look like? Because for many people, especially those who've spent years in physically demanding work, the first stage is not care, it's endurance. You learn to work through injuries. You learn to normalize pain. You learn to separate what hurts from what has to be done. Until eventually that separation stops working. And then the system steps in, but often not in the way people expect. There is treatment, yes. There are medications, referrals, procedures, management plans. But for many, especially those dealing with chronic conditions, it can feel less like a single path toward restoration and more like a long-term cycle of management. One symptom addressed while another appears. One medication introduced while another side effect begins. One waitlist leading to another waitlist. And in that space, time becomes its own kind of pressure. Because when a body is deteriorating slowly, waiting is not neutral. It is active. Things change while you wait. Pain becomes adaptation. Mobility becomes negotiation. Identity becomes uncertain. And that is something most people don't fully understand until they are inside it. Chronic pain is not just discomfort. It is restructuring. It changes how a person moves, how they sleep, how they think, how they interact with others, how they see their own future. It doesn't stay in one place in the body. It spreads into every part of life. And that is where the deeper emotional weight often sits. Not just in the physical limitation, but in the quiet grief of watching your own life feel unfamiliar. There is a kind of loss that doesn't get acknowledged easily in medical language. The loss of ability, the loss of momentum, the loss of roles you once carried without thinking about them, the loss of certainty about what comes next. And in that space, people respond differently. Some shut down, some fight, some adapt, some rebuild entirely in new directions they never would have chosen otherwise. And sometimes, in the middle of all of that, a person realizes something important. Survival itself becomes a form of decision-making. Not just medically, but personally. What do I refuse to give up? What do I still try to fight for? That part, the refusal to completely surrender, is often what keeps people moving when systems feel slow and bodies feel unpredictable. But even that resilience has limits when it is carried alone. Which is why moments of reflection often turn somewhere deeper than just physical treatment. They turn toward meaning. Because when pain stretches over time, the question stops being only, how do I fix this? And starts becoming, what is this shaping me into? That is where faith often becomes either a distant idea or a very immediate reality. Not as a replacement for responsibility, effort, or care, but as something that gives language to suffering that doesn't resolve quickly. There is a pattern throughout Scripture where suffering is not ignored or minimized. It is acknowledged directly. Psalm after psalm carries that tension, lament without denial, honesty without collapse. And in that space, something unusual happens. Pain is not always explained, but it is sometimes reframed. Not as meaningless, but as something that can still exist within a larger purpose even when the immediate outcome is unclear. That does not make the experience easier. It does not remove the weight, but it changes the question slightly, from why is this happening without relief, to what is still being formed in me through this? That shift is not abstract when you are living it. It becomes personal very quickly, because there are moments where life does narrow down to the essentials: endurance, adaptation, decision, trust, and whatever support you can still hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. And in that narrowing, priorities often get reordered in ways that were not planned. Work changes, movement changes, family time changes, identity changes, and sometimes what looked like interruption becomes something closer to redirection, even if it did not feel like that at the beginning. That is not a dismissal of frustration with systems, or with delays, or with the complexity of medical care. Those frustrations are real and they matter. People do fall through gaps. People do wait too long. People do struggle in ways that could be addressed more effectively. But alongside that reality is another reality that sits at a different level entirely: the lived experience of what a person does with the time they are in, and who they become inside it. Because even when care is imperfect, life is still unfolding. And in your own reflection, there is a very clear tension between pain and purpose, between limitation and adaptation, between loss and unexpected reprioritization. There is grief in that, but there is also something else, something quieter. A recognition that even in what feels like deterioration, something else has been shaping direction. Not always in the way you would have chosen, not always in the timing you would have preferred, but in a way that has still carried you into different clarity, different awareness, different presence with what matters most to you. And that is where many people eventually land in long seasons of struggle, not with easy answers, but with a more honest understanding that life is rarely shaped in straight lines. It moves through pressure, adjustment, limitation, persistence, and sometimes unexpected redirection. And in that, people either become hardened by it, or they begin to see differently inside it. Not everything gets resolved. Not everything gets explained, but some things do get revealed. And sometimes, that becomes its own kind of turning point, not because the pain disappears, but because the meaning around it stops being entirely closed. Quran Sun Horizon, now reaching higher than ever. This is Ridge Worship, music that lifts, inspires, and brings you closer. Part of the Ridge Radio family, owned and operated by Ledicarus Media. Ridge Worship, tune your heart.